Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this wellbeing webinar, which is about managing girls' friendships. My name is Heather O'Connor. I'm the Deputy Head Pastoral here at William Perkins School, and I'm also the designated safeguarding lead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name's Amanda Stebbings. I'm Head of Year 7 and Deputy Designated Safeguarding Lead here at SWPS.
So the purpose of this webinar really is to try and help you understand why teenage girls, and younger in fact, fall out so much. Why do they seem to have so many difficult friendship problems? And to give you, the parents, some practical tips on what you can do when your child inevitably comes home upset because there's been a huge falling out at school. One thing that we must be aware of is that between the ages of about 10 and 15, every single schoolgirl, age girl will experience some kind of friendship problem. It is entirely and completely normal. And these years can actually be very, very turbulent. There are going to be highs and there are going to be lows. And what we find is the friendship issues they experience often reach a crescendo when they get into years 8 and 9. And you as the parent can be thinking, my goodness me, when on earth is this going to end? It is problem after problem after problem. It's tears every weekend. It is very, very stressful for girls experiencing these friendship difficulties. It's painful, and it's also very painful and upsetting for you as a parent, and that really can't be underestimated.
No, indeed. And I think it's worth pointing out here that what drives this, the visceral fear that drives this, is that they are terrified of being socially isolated. So not having a friend is worse than having a friend that's not particularly working for them at the moment. And the fear is real. It's absolutely real. And the angst, the upset that they go through is real.
So what is it then about girls and their friendships which makes them so turbulent? And the first thing that we must acknowledge is that girls between the ages of, I would say, 10 and 15 place an incredibly high value on their social relationships and their peer group friendships. They are all-encompassing. They are more important to them than anything else. And that's because at that age, their external validation comes from how they are viewed, or how they think they're viewed, by their peers. As adults, our external validation will come perhaps from our career, it might come from our material acquisitions, it might come from how great our qualifications are and our hobbies. But for girls of this age, the external validation is coming from your friends, from your peer group. And it's a time when also your self-identity is forming. You know, who am I? Where do I fit in? Am I going to be successful? Am I going to be liked? It's a really difficult time of managing and understanding actually who you are. This sense of self and identity is forming.
Add into the mix the adolescent hormones, which we all know and love, which are affecting emotional regulation. They're affecting essentially their perception on the world. A teenage world is a very self-absorbed one, and that's all governed by everything we've mentioned so far, including into the mix the hormones.
So there'll be days when they're irritable, days when they're depressed, days when they're really overexcited, almost manic. Completely normal, and these are the effects of hormones. But of course, you add that into the mix of tricky friendship groups, and you are going to get some bust-ups.
You are. And social communication skills are developing at very different rates. So as a head of Year 7, I see the changes obviously from Year 6 into Year 7. And in Year 6, Year 5, Year 6, the stakes are fairly low. In the playground, it's playing it's running around, it's maybe sharing in a little game or something. But once they start secondary school, there's that sort of threshold of growing up slightly, where it becomes more about how you can sit and chat for half an hour in the playground at lunchtime. And if that's not your comfort zone, you're a little bit shy, that's going to feel extremely daunting.
Yeah, absolutely. You might be wondering then, well, you know, why don't boys have these same sorts of issues? Well, yeah, boys do have friendship problems as well, but actually they're a little perhaps more simple creatures at this age, and their friendships are characterised by competition. Who is the fastest? Who's the best footballer? Who's the smartest? Their friendships are characterised by entertaining each other, having a laugh, who can take the best on the most banter, and their shared activities. So the boys who play football will hang out together, the skateboarders will hang out together, the computer games nerds might hang out together. And so it's a bit more straightforward, it's easier, and it's lower stakes. But for girls, it's much more high stakes, isn't it?
It's much more high stakes. So for girls, it's all about the closeness, the intimacy, the sharing of secrets. Who do you trust with your secret? And what if that person tells a secret? And you want that intimacy. Girls crave that closeness and that support network of their friends and the intimacy that they're allowed to share with one another.
That's a lot of pressure for a young girl,
Huge.
actually. And if you make a mistake, you can understand why it really deeply hurts. And some girls simply aren't perhaps ready for that at 11, but yet they've got to learn those skills very, very quickly.
They do, and as we can see, those stakes are high and they're extremely difficult to quantify.
Yeah. We're all aware of the rules of friendship, and in fact, this is something that schools are very good at teaching children. Almost from reception, children are taught these explicit rules of friendship. Be kind to one another. Don't show off, make sure that you share and take turns. You mustn't leave people out, and definitely don't say mean things or post things on social media. These are the very obvious and explicit rules of friendship. And in fact, most schools, and ours is no exception, will actually have these printed on friendship cards, and will keep telling students, this is how you manage friendships. But of course, underlying that are the hidden rules, the implied or the inferred rules of friendship. And these are much more nuanced and much more difficult to understand. If you're a girl, you've got to learn these friendship rules without anybody explaining them to you. They're never written down. And you learn them by noticing when other people make a mistake, and when those students are treated badly, perhaps because they've overstepped the mark in some way, or when sadly you've made an error, you had no idea that you weren't supposed to act in that way, and suddenly you're in the doghouse. And these sorts of implicit rules are things like share your feelings, tell your friend your problem, but don't go too far, and trauma dump, that's the word they use. It's important to take pride in your appearance, but don't be too vain. You can imitate your friends, but definitely don't copy them. It's good to be funny and witty, but don't, for goodness sake, let your banter stray into anything which might upset someone or be slightly insensitive. Even messaging on social media has a whole language game, a whole set of implied rules about the correct emojis to use in certain situations, the number of X's that you put at a message, and for goodness sakes, don't ever leave somebody on red.
Well, looking at those, I mean, Heather and I have over 50 years experience of trying to read the teenage mind, and frankly, we're still learning.
Yes.
Between us, we've got over 50 years, but we're still learning. So I would ask myself, really looking at those, where is that line? I mean, where is the line between sharing your feelings but not trauma dumping, about using the correct number of emojis? It is so nuanced and so very, very hard to read where that line is. I think it's particularly hard for our neurodiverse students who learn very much by copying, and they learn social behaviour by observing. And at this stage, when you're playing it in the playground in year 6, observing and learning that is fairly straightforward. This new world they're entering is anything but straightforward.
Especially when the communication skills are actually subliminal. It's in a look, it's in a raised eyebrow, it's in body language, that a lot of these messages that you've overstepped an implied rule or an implicit boundary. How do you know that? It is really difficult. And it's no wonder that some young people are really confused about why friendships have gone wrong. So let's turn and imagine then that your child has come home, inevitable friendship problem, really, really upset. What practical tips can we offer you to manage that situation?
So Susie, that's me, comes home and says, I can't do this anymore. Everybody hates me in my class. I don't have a single friend. I've told you before, I'm really unhappy. I now want to move schools. There is nothing going right for me. Nobody understands me. I've been sobbing all afternoon. And that's it. I'm done.
It's the end of the world.
It is the end of the world.
Okay.
It is.
So as a parent, we often find ourselves actually acting in probably one of three ways. Sometimes you think in your head, for goodness sake, this is so over the top and ridiculous. They've got no idea what a difficult day I've had at work, and you need to pull yourself together quickly, get a grip, because actually I've got to take you to ballet in 5 minutes. So come on, dry your tears. That's a common one. Then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the parent who might really take this almost too seriously, or too much to heart, starts becoming very emotional and tearful themselves, or very, very angry. I'm going to ring up that friend's parent, or I'm going to tell them what for. You're clearly being bullied. You are a victim of bullying here. I'm marching down the school. Very understandable reaction. And then thirdly, there's the wise, sage advice giver. Susie, I am going to tell you what to do. Just listen to me. I can tell you how to sort this problem out. Here's my wise advice.
So as Susie sitting there listening to those three perfectly understandable parental reactions, I don't want to hear any of them. They're not helpful to me, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So what happens next? Well, what we're talking about here is how the adult reacts, being crucial to how well your child manages these difficult feelings and emotions, and how they can learn to move forward. There's the adult who underreacts, and the child is not feeling validated or listened to, and thinking, well, my parent doesn't care. There's no point in coming to my parent when I've got these friendship problems, because they just make me feel a bit stupid about myself. And actually, that's quite undermining for a child's self-esteem. There's the overreacting parent, same outcome. The parent's not validating or listening to me. I don't want them to go to the school. They're taking it out of my control, and therefore disempowering me as the child. And of course, let's not forget that teachers are adults. So teachers can just as easily underreact or overreact. It's not good for teachers to say, for goodness sakes, the whole lot of you are ridiculous. Stop being silly. Don't bother me with this. And it's also equally not good for teachers to overreact, going in a really harsh, punitive way, casting students as victims and villains. And actually, quite often, when adults do interfere, they can actually make the situation a whole lot worse.
They can. And I think what we need to remember here is that Susie, a moment ago, was understandably seeing the world through that misery lens of adolescence, coming home and dumping everything on you as the parent. What she wanted you to do was to listen, to empathise, to understand. But if you underreact, then she's going to feel the need to over-exaggerate next time something happens. She's going to feel the need to make it sound even more dramatic and even worse, because otherwise you're not hearing me, you don't know that this is my real pain, and you don't understand me. And I think as adults, parents, teachers alike, we have to remember the adapted truth, which is the perception that Susie came home with was totally valid to her. We mustn't take that away from Susie, because her pain is real, but we need to be aware that she's giving it her all so that she gets the reaction just right from you.
And what happens to any human being in a situation that's quite emotional is that it's very hard for us to step outside of our own experience and see something objectively. And certainly the 12 and 13-year-old girl isn't really able to do that. So when you're hearing this terrible story, remember that this is your child's perception, and it might not actually be the full reality. And part of our job as adults is really to help them to understand what actually might be going on, and being perhaps a little bit more rational about things. So just to go back over how to respond and a few top tips, remember that what your child is wanting is to offload all of their angst and emotion onto you. They're giving you it so that they can get those feelings out of their own psyche. And it is tough as a parent, because this might happen at 11:30 at night when you're absolutely shattered. But be patient and take it on. You're the sponge. You're going to soak up this angst. And actually, the very act of speaking it out loud, being validated by the person who loves you more than anything in the world, and being reassured is often all it takes for the child to start working through in their head, actually, what can I do? And starting to feel a little bit better about themselves and a little bit more confident in who they are. They don't want to be dismissed or judged or patronised with a load of advice. That's the last thing they want. And your advice might be brilliant, but all they're going to hear is a bit of nagging, to be honest with you. And remember, it's tiresome, but this is going to happen over and over and over again. And you think to yourself in your head, here we go again. My job is simply to listen, validate and reassure my child. And one particular good tip is actually to encourage your child to try and empathise with the other children in the group. You know, you could say, you know, why do you think Alison was feeling like that? Why do you think Alison reacted in that way?
Yeah, sort of get them to think about the other person's perspective. Sort of say, well, what made her do that? That sounds unusual. She's not normally like that. Perhaps she's going through a tough time as well. And try not to judge the person that they're telling you about. It's very easy because the instinct as a parent is to protect your child, of course, and to believe your child quite naturally, of course. We know that. The difficulty is trying not to then say, well, obviously she's being vile. I try not to judge the other child, because what is the worst scenario in the world today could well be fixed by a sleepover at the weekend, and next week they're best friends again, and you're left looking very silly if you've started to contact their parents. And actually when children say, sometimes as a head of year, parents will contact me and also say, oh, please don't tell the school. They actually mean it when they say that, please don't tell the school. Obviously, there are times when the school has to be involved, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. But try not to cast your child as a victim and the other as a villain, and try not to cast judgment on their friends, because they are still their friends, I think, usually.
Yeah, so what you're trying to do in your head is get your child to come out with the advice that you would have actually given them. That's what you're trying to get them to do, so that they feel that they own that and that they've come up with it themselves, and, you know, aren't they clever for doing that? Because as they mature and grow older, they will get much more skillful at dealing with that difficult person, or dealing with a disappointment, or dealing with, you know, the horrible feeling that two people have gone on a shopping trip and you weren't included. You want them to have the tools to be able to cope with that themselves. And that's your aim in this. It's part of your job, really, I suppose, educating your child. So Amanda mentioned about the school's involvement. And I think it's really important for us to note that bullying does occur in all schools. And at the back of your mind, you must be thinking to yourself whether actually what you're hearing from your child is crossing over into bullying. If the friendship problem is simply never going away, if it's starting to really affect your child and they don't want to come to school, or they're feeling very anxious, or you see any of the other signs of anxiety-driven behaviour, such as self-harm, etc., or even if your instinct is telling you this really isn't good, then please contact your child's school. For you, this is the first time you've gone through this, so it's hard to tell whether you're overreacting or underreacting. But your child's school will have dealt with this 1,000 times, okay? They will know what to do. And the first thing is that they're going to need to do is to investigate, to establish whether these behaviours have actually crossed the threshold into bullying. And all schools have an anti-bullying policy. And if the school investigates and determines that it is in fact bullying, then whole systems and processes will be brought into play. But for the sake of this evening, let's just assume that actually what you're talking about is normal friendship turbulence, the normal everyday fallings out that young girls experience. Sorts of things that work really, really well in a school is actually to engage the whole friendship group sometimes in understanding that something's gone wrong, guys. What can we do to sort it out? what sorts of behaviours in your group are actually upsetting you all, and what do you do as a group that you really love and value about each other. These sorts of conversations can be really, really effective and powerful. And the school is essentially doing what you're doing as the parent, trying to empower the young people to sort out the differences and manage the problems for themselves. It could also be that actually individuals in the group, and this may be your child, actually could do with some one-to-one help and support, managing a difficult friendship, helping them to be confident, giving them the words to say when a scenario plays out in school. And schools will have pastoral teams that will help do that. We have a wellbeing room team here in our school, and certainly every school will have an SEND department with experienced staff who can really support young people, particularly those who are neurodiverse or who have social and emotional or communication difficulties. And as well, actually, give you help and advice on how to support your daughter when she's in the midst of this really difficult and very emotional friendship problem.
Yes, and I think it's important if a friendship has blown up and it's been resolved in one of the ways that we've mentioned, it's very tempting then to go back and revisit that. Well, how are things with so-and-so? And if your child says, actually, they're fine, let that be. That's a big success, because it can be very tempting when it was absolute nuclear fallout this time last week. It can be very hard to then accept, oh my God, how can that all suddenly be fixed? And you're tempting to sort of, revisit that and pick at the scab, so to speak. And that doesn't help anyone, because that doesn't allow the wound to heal over. So some young people are very good at picking at the scab and not letting things go. Absolutely. So if you sense that that's what your child's doing, just say, let the scar heal, give it a little bit longer, just like when you graze your knee, it might need a few more days, and then things will start to feel better.
Yeah, and a cooling off period is often all that it actually needs for the young person's emotional state to actually dissipate and come down. I think it is good to let your child know that you're still there for them and you're ready and willing to listen. How are things with Alison? Are they okay? Yeah, they're fine. Great. And then hands off. And we do sometimes see young people holding on intensely to grudges that go back years, and sometimes even parents holding on to very painful situations that might have happened in year 5 or year 6. So be aware that that is really unhelpful to a child trying to move on and make good friendships. So you want to try and leave the past in the past when you can.
Definitely. I've got a lovely nugget to share with you, which I read, which is when you hold on to a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at somebody else because you're that cross and you're that angry about something, the only person getting burned is you. So let those grudges go. It's really powerful, actually, to do that.
So I just want to draw your attention to an absolutely fantastic book for parents. Andrew Hampton is an ex-head teacher, and he has a nationally recognised school training scheme called Girls on Board that we have certainly made use of here in our school, which helps us understand girls' friendships, adapted truth, and why they fall out with each other. And this book gives loads of practical tips to parents. It's quite a short read, a couple of hours, and will really help you understand your daughter. And it's particularly good on helping you understand the difference between normal friendship problems and bullying.
It is, it's excellent. What I like about it in particular is that his daughters Holly and Naomi helped him to write it. So they said, Dad, this is what we need you to hear. This is from the girls' point of view, which is what makes it, for me, it really sort of validated what we do. I mean, we are the experts here. We're setting ourselves up as such. But this book has really kind of cemented the fact that, yes, we are doing the right thing. Yeah. And parents who I've recommended this book to, who've read it, have all written back to me and said it's an amazing read. So, yeah.
So, yeah, a really good resource for you. So, questions now. I think we have had quite a few questions, haven't we, Amanda, before the webinar?
We have, and quite a few of them are along a similar theme. So I'm going to try and bring them into one and answer them in that way. So lots of you were asking, how do they negotiate jealousy where friends don't want to share them with other friends? How to extract oneself from a friendship that's just not working, or they're feeling trapped in a relationship which to them feels toxic, friendship that feels toxic. They're unhappy. They don't know how to get out. We spoke, didn't we, with our wellbeing room as well, our ladies in there, and the message from all of us really here at Sir William Poker, the best way to deal with this is to be kindly direct. So you might find that somebody is desperate to be friends with you, and you want to have a wider friendship group. So you can say to that young person, look, I really like you. I really want to be your friend. I also want to have other friends, and it's really important that you understand that. And that can be really hard.
Yeah, it's hard for timid children to know how to do that. And certainly in many schools you might practice with them of how they say that, but kindness and being direct really is the only way. And I would also say that actually there is nothing wrong with walking away from a friendship that's not working. And between the ages of 10 and 15, friendships are going to change anyway. They are very nebulous, they move, they change all the time. So actually, if it's simply not working, empower your child to say, actually, I'm sorry, this isn't for me. Help them practice the words, but be direct. There is nothing worse than trying to get that message across in a sort of non-verbal way or trying to ignore or leave out the other child. Better to be direct.
Yeah, we've spent this webinar talking about the nuances in girls' friendships, and actually when it comes to maybe ending a girl friendship or making a little bit of a, giving them a bit of time and space apart, there's nothing like the direct approach actually, because as we know, the nuances can be reread and misread.
Absolutely.
Over and over.
Another question, which I thought was a good one. What do you do if your child finds it really hard to make friends or keep friends? That is really heartbreaking. And it is true that some people do find it hard to make friends. That is just a fact of life. What I would say is that is definitely the opportunity to reach out to your child's school. Most schools, including ours, will actually have friendship club. We would have a break and a lunchtime place where young people can go to play board games. It's a slightly semi-structured, safe space to go if you're finding friendships difficult. And quite often, the other young people that go to that club are also really wanting to make friends. And that can be an absolute game changer. So do reach out to your school if your child does find friendships difficult. Certainly the SEND department will be able to help you. The other thing that I would suggest for actually all children, all young people, is to join lots of clubs, to have friendships outside of school and in school. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, because if that very small friendship group breaks down, where do you go? So definitely join guides or do stagecoach or do sports, because again, these are structured and organised social times which can enable you to make really, really good friendships without perhaps, with a little bit more perhaps adult support.
That's right. Another question that came through was about a child feeling very excluded from their friendship group. One of the things I've heard Kate Davis in our wellbeing room say over and over to our young people here is, you are enough. You are a wonderful, valid human being in your own right. Friendships should not be hard work. If your daughter or your child is in a friendship that is really hard work, it's permanently difficult, it's tricky, the goalposts change all the time, and it feels quite so, oh blimey, this is hard work. If that friendship's not serving you, that's the time to be kindly direct.
Yeah. And it's time to invest more time in your other friendships, because there are good friendships and better friendships out there. So I think, looking at the clock, I think we've come to the end really of our webinar on girls' friendships. It has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope you found it helpful and enlightening, and I hope sincerely that you found some practical tips moving forward to support your daughter. And don't forget that you do come through the other side of this. By the time they get into year 10 and 11, most of these friendship problems have melted away, and you have a wonderful daughter who is happy and settled in her friendship groups. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.